Now I give the floor to Dr. Chaham Alalouch, who was presented earlier. So Dr. Chaham, do you hear us? Can you share your presentation? So yes, we can see you now. The floor is yours, Dr. Chaham.
They should unmute.
Yes.
Yes. Can you see on my screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Let me take this out of the screen and then I'll come back.
So we can see it clearly.
Yeah, I'm just going to the presentation mode. Yeah. Hello everyone. Thanks for UMAR for organizing this timely event, and thank you very much for the previous speakers who actually enriched us in different aspects. In fact, when I was asked to talk about post-COVID-19 adaptive strategies, I did my homework. I looked at the literature and went through what people are talking about. And I think there is a very simple yet effective way of looking at our built environment in a way that it can be related to how the disease is transmitted. This particular part of the literature has been under discussed. So I thought to highlight this methodological, I would say, approach. The title is The Secret is to Look Behind the Skin, a configurational look at post-COVID-19 physical distancing requirements in building and city design. And the key word here actually is the configurational look, which means that looking at the space as a whole as opposite to dealing with spaces as individual entities. I chose the black and white theme for my presentation today because I think we are in uncertain time, and uncertainty requires truth, as Guardian said. No doubt that physical distancing become a fact, become a reality. And actually, one of the most intimate action of a human being, the touch, the physical intimacy, become forbidden. But that's particularly relevant to the Mediterranean region because people in the Mediterranean region are known for different personal space aspects and the use of their body to express their feelings. For example, the first thing you get when you arrive to Italy is a hug. But as my previous colleague said, there is an opportunity always in every challenge. So let's look at the bright side of the issue. When the pandemic started, people started to blame density and mobility. And as a consequence, of course, Professor Ashraf Salama highlighted a lot about density, but as a consequence of blaming density and mobility, we have seen a strong and big tendency in the academic atmosphere toward locality, complete communities. We start hearing of self-sufficient neighborhoods, sustainable neighborhood, closed neighborhoods, claiming that those approaches for urban design will improve the health of the communities, will improve outdoor access to outdoor spaces, also reduce inequality and promote social justice. My view on that is that we don't want to rush into conclusions. I think most of the literature I've read is based on speculation and personal viewpoint as opposite to being based on empirical data that is collected and analyzed in a rigid and scientific way. From my perspective, growth is associated with interaction always. I'm afraid rushing into conclusion at this stage will result in undesired outcomes in the far future, if it's not near future. I'm not saying those approaches are not recommended, but we need to be careful and understand not to drive our cities into closed communities. We've seen such a beautiful alteration or proposal for alterations of outdoor spaces, which is actually very beautiful. I would like to live there. But my question is, what if the designed built environment, indoor and outdoor, does not allow opportunities to avoid undesired encounter, undesired proximity and gathering where the disease is transmitted. So I think we all know now the world is moving toward easing the lockdown restriction. The economy cannot afford anymore. And indeed, we as space designers and producers have ethical and moral responsibility to address concerns regarding our collective well-being, since we have the means to do so. We design spaces, so we have the means to do so. We do need to look at our spatial design, how we approach the design itself. And we need to identify areas in building densities where the virus is likely to spread. Then these areas can be modified in a way that it reduces the likelihood of the spread of the virus. Of course, priority should be given to existing buildings, and we need to balance these approaches with the costs and the effectiveness of these solutions. And by the way, I put the female urban designer above the male urban designer because the male architect, because I think female are underrepresented in the architecture and construction industry. Going back to what I was saying, first thing when the pandemic started, I was thinking, what's our role? How effective can we, as space producers, whether architects, urban designers, or planners? I came across this beautiful hierarchy provided by the American Institute of Architects, AIA, and it shows the hierarchy of control for COVID-19 from most effective to the least effective. Most effective being elimination, which means social isolation. And we concluded now the economy cannot accommodate strict social isolation anymore. People need to go back to their normal lives with social or physical distancing measures. Second effective measure is substitution, which means replacing the hazard, but we cannot do that. We cannot replace COVID-19, so it's not an option. Third most effective measure is the engineering solutions through ventilation and the physical barriers, through architecture, partitioning, and the spatial design. So actually, our input as space producers, and I keep saying space producers to cover architects and urban designers, as space producers and designers, comes immediately after elimination. And that's put on our shoulders a great deal of responsibility. So what we can do, what I'm going to do first in this presentation, I'm going to briefly address the new normal. Everyone talking about new normal now. So what aspects of design, movement, and interaction will define the new normal? How the design of the built environment, including building and cities, will affect the speed of the virus, this current virus, and maybe new viruses that might emerge in the future. And here I'm not talking about ventilation, about engineering aspects, because it's not my area of specialties, in spite of its important and crucial role. But I'm talking about the relation between how spaces are designed and people behavior, and as a consequence, the spread of the virus. Lastly, and which is the core actually of the presentation, is how we can develop configurational thinking, how we can develop a holistic look at the built environment in order to identify or predict people behavior, and then we can alter the built environment to alter, consequently, that undesired behavior. The new normal is the social distancing. It's fact now, we live in it. People start doing several things. We've seen this picture before with Professor Ashraf. We've seen the physical distancing custom. We've seen some cafes in Germany asking the customer to wear pool noodles. We've seen different procedures in malls from all over the world. This picture from Delhi in India. At urban level, we've seen different procedures, different measures. We've seen also actually the physical distancing shoe. I don't think this is the aim why this shoe was designed, but it's a way people are talking about. From my perspective, all of these measures are cosmetic. They touch the skin. They do not deal with the root of the problem. The evidence of this lies on these two pictures. This one picture from a poor neighborhood in India, another picture from inside the British Parliament. And in both pictures, we've seen such cosmetic procedures have been neglected, and people starting to behave in undesired way, neglecting the social distances requirement. What I want to say is that the root of the problem in our built environment and COVID-19 transmission lies in space users' behavior and the ability of the built environment, or in other terms, the spatial structure, to provide opportunities to avoid undesired interaction. It all comes back to people behavior and how the built environment regulates and provides opportunity and options. These are two examples from indoor space in a hospital and outdoor space in front of supermarkets. In both cases, we can see that the built environment allowed a linear social or physical distances. Although physical distance is radius, as we know, but the built environment in these cases did not allow a proper social distancing. So we've seen also some procedures. Many of these pictures are hovering around the social media and several artificial websites, but most of them deals with the stationary mood of people. When people are not moving, they are stationary and doing some activities, and they are all based on standards, dimension of furniture, and furniture arrangement. It's true that we don't know much about the COVID-19, how COVID-19 transmits, but what we do know, and I'm not a disease scientist, a transmission scientist, but from what we're reading, that face-to-face encounter and proximity are major reasons for transmissions. So we have face-to-face encounter, which happen in corridors mainly, and proximity are the two reasons for transmission of the disease. The role of touching surfaces seems to be still debatable among disease transmission scientists. It's not clear yet. But we know also that indoor environment is more risky than the outdoor environment. So we have three factors. Indoor environment is risky, face-to-face encounter, and proximity. If we look at how people move in space, these examples are from Professor Bill Hilliard's work in space syntax back in 1984, and Julian Hanson, of course, as well. People move in lines, and that represent the face-to-face encounter. And they co-present together in complex spaces, and that's proximity. So if we can analyze the built environment, the design of our buildings and cities in terms of linear movement and complex spaces, we can predict where the transmission is likely to happen, transmission of the disease. And here where configurational thinking comes into play. Space syntax theory showed us that what matters when it comes to people behavior is not the space itself, but the global relationship between the spatial structure. Configuration means relation taking into account other relations. And this is actually based on a well-known principle in psychology, which is whole is more than the sum of its parts, which I completely support and believe in. Space syntax came up with a very simple and easy way of representing the spaces based on their relationships. Space syntax, or this configurational approach, does not recognize the physical attributes of the built environment, does not recognize the area, the volume, the materials, the texture, the color. It recognizes the spatial relationships. Those are two examples for the same spatial structure, two simple rooms. The only differences is one door extra in the B space. But if we represent each space as a dot and each accessibility relationship, or in brackets door, as a line, we can re-represent this spatial structure in a way that provides deeper insights. For example, the spatial structure to the left-hand side, if you are in space B and you observe undesired movement, you have the option to move to A or to C. Whereas if you are on space on the other design, that's the picture to your right-hand side, and you are on space B, and you observed undesired encounter, you have one option only, which is to move to space A and encounter that undesired movement. This is very simple, but imagine in a more complex spatial structures, it provides more deep insights. Space Syntax managed to develop number of quantification measures. As far as I know, there are 11, and many of them has been correlated with certain behavior. Each one of these measures, it's not the place now to explain them, but I want to explain the idea in general. Each one of these measures is a set of several equations that are calculated through several softwares in order to produce a heat map, like in this TAD gallery example. This is a classical example from space syntax literature, the TAD gallery. The heat map to your left-hand side represent the integration values, which is one of the most famous measures of space syntax. Red color represent high value, blue color represent low value. Whereas the other picture to your right-hand side represents people movement path during the first 10 minutes of their visit to that museum. And we can clearly see the correspondence between where people move and the high integration value. And actually, there's hundreds of studies published in peer-reviewed, highly respected peer-reviewed journals that showed the relation between people behavior, indoor and outdoor, and integration value. Another aspect, integration value also is related to where the commercial activities are located in cities. In one of our work that has been published a year ago, I think, in Sustainable Cities and Societies, we found significant prediction power between one of the space syntax measure called normalized least angle choice and the distribution of the residential land uses in buildings. In another study, we found that some of the measures can also predict people preferences, not only behavior, and this was new in that field. This is an example of a hospital ward, and what we found that integration and visual control, two different measures, can predict people preferences for hospital bed locations. So what I want to say is that space syntax and configurational thinking is a very powerful evidence-based tool. Reflecting this into COVID-19 requirements.
May I use the same thing, please? Can I ask you?
Yeah, I'll try to finish in a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this figure is provided by Dr. Christine Saylor in UCL, and it shows the same spatial structure with different accessibility, and we can see the different representation of that spaces. This one, people have less options, so they are likely to encounter undesired movement, whereas this one provides more options, but it's not good for verifying things. I'll skip this, then I move to what we are doing currently. I'm not going to present any results. I just want to show the potential of the method. This is the recreational center at Sultan Qaboos University, and is very popular building in the university. We did visibility graph analysis, and this red area represents where people are likely to be present together and move in that building. With simple alteration, partitioning, simple partitioning, very cheap treatment, rearrangements of furniture, we can alter this value and as a consequence affect the proximity factor in that building. Another measure is the control, which represent visual control, which represents the junction. So we know where the junction areas are. Again, we can alter these designs and subject it to the analysis again. This is a quick video. It shows also that we can add people to the space, and we can see how they navigate through the space. So it gives us a clearer vision of what will happen on that space. Lastly, this is an example of the Student Commercial Center at Sultan Qaboos University. I simplified the spaces into dots and the accessibility into lines and rearranged the space into such representation, which we call Pacified Map. And we can see this point clearly. It's a junction. It's a major junction because it leads for many spaces. And it's red also. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. Just a second, I'm finishing. And it's red also high integration, so this space needs to be dealt with. Lastly, we have this accessibility relationship, which leads the root space to the junction, and people has no other options, so this space also needs to be dealt with architecturally. Finally, in conclusion, we need a paradigm shift in terms of how we deal with our built environment to avoid the spread of the disease. We need to collaborate more than ever. Configurational thinking need to be integrated into design education. Also, these simple tools that I presented can be used by institutes to restructure their spatial built environment before they allow their employees to come back. And of course, this is one facet of the issue that need to be dealt with in conjunction with other aspects like ventilation in buildings and air movement in neighborhoods. And thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Dr. Chaham. Yes, thank you, Dr. Chaham, for this very informative presentation. It was really useful. And now we will open the floor for any questions.